Nvidia's rise wasn't loud, brash, or even entirely expected. It was a quiet coup. While most people were looking at social networks, e-commerce giants, and smartphone manufacturers, Nvidia was doing something far more foundational. It was building the digital nervous system of the modern world. In a span of 3 decades, it transformed from a niche graphics card maker for PC gamers into the most critical infrastructure company of the 21st century. It didn't just ride the AI wave, it powered it. It didn't just contribute to gaming culture, it architected the graphical DNA of it. And while governments debated policy and tech pundits squabbled over social media drama, Nvidia was embedding itself into everything from supercomputers to your thermostat. To understand how Nvidia took over the world, we must start with a man named Jensen Huang, a Taiwanese-American immigrant who co-founded the company in 1993 with a vision that would take decades to crystallize. At the time, graphics weren't sexy. Most people didn't know what a GPU was, and even fewer understood what it could do. But Huang had a vision for accelerating computing, not just through brute force, but by mimicking how nature, especially the human brain, handled complex problems. The company's first real success came through the video game industry. As games became more complex, more immersive, and more dependent on realistic visuals, Nvidia's graphics processing units, GPUs, became indispensable. The GeForce series, launched in 1999, marked a breakthrough that would make the brand a household name in gaming. But gaming was only the bait. The hook was far deeper. Nvidia realized early on that GPUs weren't just for graphics, they were for parallel processing. Unlike CPUs, which process tasks linearly and struggled with simultaneous computation, GPUs were built to handle thousands of tasks at once. This made them ideal for a new field that was just starting to bloom: artificial intelligence. Deep learning, neural networks, and machine learning all required enormous computational resources, and not just any kind. They required fast, flexible, and parallel architecture. Nvidia had exactly what the AI world needed, even before it knew it needed it. While other companies were focusing on consumer electronics and chasing quarterly earnings, Nvidia invested heavily in CUDA, its proprietary parallel computing platform and programming model. CUDA was not just a tool, it was a moat. It created a loyal developer ecosystem that was trained to think in Nvidia's language. As AI research accelerated, especially after the ImageNet breakthroughs in the early 2010s, Nvidia's GPUs became the gold standard for training neural networks. Google Brain, OpenAI, Tesla's Autopilot, and nearly every major AI lab relied on Nvidia's hardware to push the boundaries of intelligence. Without Nvidia, we don't get ChatGPT, we don't get self-driving cars, we don't get real-time medical diagnostics or robotic process automation. Nvidia didn't just dominate AI, it became its beating heart. And here's the genius of it. Nvidia didn't need to sell you a product directly. It sold the tools to the people building the future. While Apple got the attention for shiny gadgets and Tesla for sexy cars, Nvidia quietly sat at the core of their capabilities. This is how the world was taken, one chip at a time. When you watched a movie rendered with special effects, Nvidia's GPUs likely powered the rendering farm. When scientists simulated climate change or protein folding, they turned to Nvidia-powered supercomputers. When cryptocurrency miners triggered a global shortage in high-performance hardware, they were buying Nvidia cards by the pallet. The 2020s became the decade where Nvidia's foresight turned into dominance. The explosion of AI created insatiable demand for compute power. Data centers became temples of modern civilization, and Nvidia was the high priest. Its A100 and H100 chips became the silicon equivalent of gold, scarce, powerful, and essential. While competitors like AMD and Intel scrambled to pivot, Nvidia had already built years of momentum, trust, and technical superiority. Its data center business, once a modest line item, ballooned into its biggest profit engine. Nvidia was no longer just a chip maker, it was a platform, an empire. But perhaps the most subtle and brilliant move in Nvidia's conquest was its cultural infiltration. Gamers worshipped it, developers depended on it, investors trusted it, governments needed it. And yet, Nvidia rarely made headlines for controversy. It played the long game, staying out of political squabbles, focusing instead on relentless execution. Even when it stumbled, like the failed acquisition of ARM, it bounced back with grace and speed. Every setback seemed to morph into a new strategy. Instead of controlling ARM, Nvidia doubled down on software-defined silicon, AI-specific processors, and partnerships with hyperscalers like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. The scope of Nvidia's influence today is staggering. In healthcare, its Clara platform powers AI models that assist in radiology and drug discovery. In autonomous vehicles, its Drive ecosystem gives car makers the ability to train, simulate, and deploy self-driving systems. In robotics, its Jensen modules bring computer vision and edge AI to drones, factory arms, and delivery bots. In defense, its chips power simulations and autonomous targeting systems. In finance, its GPUs enable high-frequency trading and fraud detection models. In agriculture, AI-driven machines run on Nvidia hardware to optimize yield and water usage. There isn't a single industry untouched by its reach. And yet, the average consumer still sees Nvidia as that gaming graphics card company. That's part of the magic. While big tech companies drew antitrust scrutiny and public backlash, Nvidia largely avoided becoming a villain. It never built a social network that polarized society. It never created an ad network that commoditized user data. It simply built tools, damn good ones, that empowered others. This allowed Nvidia to grow into a $2 trillion titan without becoming a target. It was everywhere, but invisible. By 2025, the AI boom had reached a fever pitch. Chatbots, co-pilots, autonomous agents, and AI-generated everything became daily tools. Enterprises scrambled to adopt AI into every workflow, every customer experience, every back-end system. Cloud providers scaled up their GPU clusters like madmen. And Nvidia? It printed money. There was no real alternative. No one else could match the performance, ecosystem, and trust Nvidia had cultivated over 2 decades. Its hardware backlog stretched months into the future. Venture capital firms instructed startups to optimize for Nvidia architecture. Research papers included, "We used Nvidia GPUs," the way one might say, "We used oxygen." Yet Nvidia wasn't complacent. It continued to innovate on multiple fronts. Its Grace CPU line aimed to challenge Intel and AMD on their turf. Its Omniverse platform pushed into the next frontier, the metaverse and industrial digital twins. While Meta burned billions trying to make the metaverse sexy, Nvidia focused on making it useful. BMW, Siemens, and Boeing began using Nvidia's virtual environments to simulate factories, train AI agents, and optimize workflows. It was the future of work, not entertainment, and Nvidia was the backbone. Nvidia also understood something most others missed: the fusion of AI and simulation. The real world is messy, expensive, and slow. Simulations, whether of weather systems, logistics networks, or supply chains, are faster, cheaper, and infinitely replayable. But to simulate reality at high fidelity, you need massive computational power. Enter Nvidia. With GPU-accelerated physics, ray tracing, and AI, it began replicating reality itself in digital form. This wasn't science fiction. It was digital terraforming. Entire cities, supply chains, and natural phenomena could now be modeled, tested, and improved without ever touching the real world. This is how Nvidia quietly took over. Not by brute force, not by splashy marketing, not by controversy, but by creating the tools, the language, and the infrastructure of the new era. When you control the pickaxes in a gold rush, you don't need to dig. Everyone comes to you. And with AI, crypto, simulation, gaming, autonomous systems, and data centers all exploding at once, everyone needed Nvidia. The genius of Nvidia's empire is that it doesn't look like one. There are no borders, no flags. It is not built on land, but on logic. It doesn't control minds, but it enables those who do. Its influence is subtle yet absolute, like gravity, like oxygen, like code. It's not just in your games, it's in your research lab, your doctor's office, your cloud provider, your national defense systems. The world didn't vote Nvidia into power. It just happened, quietly, efficiently, inevitably. What makes Nvidia's dominance even more fascinating is that it wasn't always the clear favorite. In the 2000s, when Intel was the king of CPUs and Microsoft monopolized the operating system layer, Nvidia was often seen as an accessory brand. Important, yes, but nowhere near the center of the tech universe. ATI, which later became part of AMD, was Nvidia's chief rival in the graphics space, and the battle for market share was brutal. Fanboys on both sides argued on gaming forums over frame rates, driver stability, and price-performance ratios. Nvidia won many of those early battles, not just with superior hardware, but with something far more strategic: software. CUDA, launched in 2006, was not just a side project. It was a paradigm shift. Most hardware companies struggle with software. Nvidia embraced it. By enabling developers to write software that fully leveraged the parallel architecture of GPUs, CUDA became a skeleton key to scientific computing, engineering simulations, and eventually machine learning. At the time, nobody was shouting from rooftops about AI, but Nvidia was already planting its seeds in university labs and research centers. The company sponsored academic programs, hosted developer conferences like GTC, and quietly built an army of GPU-native thinkers. Nvidia didn't just sell hardware, it cultivated an entire way of computing. Fast forward to the rise of deep learning. When AlexNet stunned the machine learning world in 2012 by demolishing the ImageNet competition using Nvidia GPUs, it was a thunderclap moment. Suddenly, AI researchers realized they no longer had to settle for slow CPUs or custom-built ASICs. They had off-the-shelf hardware, optimized software libraries, and support from a company that had already anticipated their needs. This alignment between academic progress and industrial capability created a flywheel effect. The better the AI models became, the more compute they needed, and the more Nvidia's value soared. It's not just that Nvidia made the best chips, it created the best environment to use them. The ecosystem strategy is straight from the playbook of giants like Apple and Microsoft, but Nvidia applied it to an entirely new domain. Think about it. Every modern AI framework, TensorFlow, PyTorch, MXNet, JAX, runs best on Nvidia GPUs. The company's QDNN and TensorRT libraries became the default backend for neural network acceleration. Nvidia understood that software lock-in is more powerful than hardware specs. A researcher doesn't just need teraflops, they need tool chains, debuggers, pre-trained models, community support, and compatibility. Nvidia gave them all of it, wrapped in green and black. And it wasn't just software. Nvidia knew how to work the supply chain like a master. Its fabrication was outsourced to TSMC, the best semiconductor foundry in the world. This allowed Nvidia to focus entirely on design, while leveraging Taiwan's cutting-edge manufacturing capacity without taking on the capital burden. It also made Nvidia an early adopter of smaller transistor nodes, getting more power per watt, more performance per die. Every time Moore's law inched forward, Nvidia was ready to capitalize. But perhaps its boldest, most future-proof play came in the form of vertical expansion. Jensen Huang didn't just want to sell chips to everyone else. He wanted Nvidia to become the core of every intelligent system on the planet. That meant diving into end-to-end solutions. The Nvidia DGX systems bundled hardware and software in an integrated AI supercomputer. The Nvidia Drive Stack bundled chips, OS, and AI models for car makers. The Omniverse platform bundled physics, simulation, and collaboration tools for digital twins. Nvidia wasn't satisfied being a part of the story. It wanted to be the author. As other companies scrambled to bolt on AI strategies, Nvidia made it its DNA. Even the chip architecture itself evolved for the task. Tensor cores, introduced with the Volta architecture, were specialized units designed specifically for matrix math, the bread and butter of deep learning. By sacrificing some general-purpose capabilities in favor of AI specialization, Nvidia showed it wasn't afraid to bet big. It was no longer building chips for everyone. It was building chips for the future. And then came the explosion of inference. Training a neural network is expensive, yes, but running it at scale across billions of queries per day? That's the real gold mine. Chatbots, recommendation engines, fraud detection systems, automated assistants. These all require constant GPU horsepower to interpret, respond, and learn from user behavior. Nvidia saw this trend and optimized accordingly. With every chip generation, from Turing to Ampere to Hopper, the balance between training and inference efficiency improved. It wasn't just about training GPT-4 in a data center. It was about running it 100 million times a day on a billion devices. But Nvidia's takeover didn't stop at AI. It was becoming the standard bearer for compute acceleration as a whole. Traditional HPC, high-performance computing centers, which once ran on exotic CPUs and massive clusters, now used Nvidia GPUs to accelerate simulations in physics, chemistry, climate science, and more. The company's Mellanox acquisition in 2020 gave it high-speed networking capabilities, essential for scaling massive GPU clusters. It was a perfect fit. Nvidia didn't just make fast chips, it now controlled the arteries between them. And while Intel fumbled with delayed fabrication nodes and internal turmoil, and while AMD slowly clawed its way back with impressive Ryzen and EPIC chips, Nvidia surged forward like a predator with radar. It wasn't burdened by legacy PC baggage. It wasn't distracted by smartphones or ad tech. It had one obsession: accelerating intelligence. Even its branding evolved with grace. The GeForce line remained the crown jewel for gamers, but it wasn't Nvidia's true cash cow anymore. Professional visualization, data centers, automotive, edge computing — these were the high-margin arenas that lifted Nvidia's valuation into the stratosphere. And yet, gamers still worshipped the brand. That loyalty, forged in the fires of 1080p battles and framerate wars, carried over into the professional world. Developers who grew up optimizing games on Nvidia now built LLMs on its A100s. That's a kind of brand trust money can't buy. And then came the chip shortages, the global supply chain crunch that revealed just how central Nvidia had become. As demand for GPUs skyrocketed from every direction, miners, gamers, researchers, cloud providers, prices surged. Scalpers made fortunes. Enterprises waited months for deliveries. But through it all, Nvidia's brand only grew more powerful. Scarcity breeds desire, and desire breeds dominance. The more people needed Nvidia, the more irreplaceable it became. At the geopolitical level, this became a problem. The US government began to see Nvidia not just as a tech company, but as strategic infrastructure. The CHIPS Act, export controls, and AI weaponization concerns began swirling around it. China, the second-largest market for Nvidia's products, became a flashpoint. The US restricted Nvidia's most advanced chips from being sold to Chinese firms. Nvidia responded by creating new, slightly downgraded versions to comply with regulations. Still good enough to maintain business, but tailored to US political optics. It was a chess move of the highest order. Nvidia didn't fight the regulations, it adapted around them. Even the metaverse hype, which flared and fizzled with Meta's rebrand, played right into Nvidia's long-term vision. While Meta focused on avatars and social VR, Nvidia focused on digital twins, virtual representations of real-world systems. This wasn't about making meetings cooler, it was about simulating the planet. Infrastructure, supply chains, power grids, hospitals, even entire countries could now be modeled, optimized, and trained in Omniverse, and every single pixel of it required GPUs to function. And when generative AI hit the mainstream in 2022-2023 with ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALL-E, and others, it was Nvidia's silicon at the center. OpenAI didn't build its own chips. Neither did Stability AI or Anthropic or any of the other breakout stars. They built on Nvidia. It was like watching a gold rush where one company owned the shovels, the maps, and the railroad into town. Nvidia didn't need to be the AI product. It was the AI platform. As investors and enterprises threw billions into AI transformation, Nvidia's quarterly earnings exploded. And the kicker? It had barely scratched the surface of Edge AI. Edge AI, tiny local models running on devices like drones, sensors, and security cameras, was the next wave. And Nvidia was ready with Jensen, Orin, and other low-power chips. From factory floors to autonomous farming equipment to smart traffic systems, these AI endpoints would be everywhere. And Nvidia would power their vision, their inference, and their training. Quietly, ubiquitously. By now, Nvidia was no longer just a chip company. It was the invisible hand in global intelligence. It had conquered the stack. Hardware, software, tool chains, platforms. It had alliances with the biggest cloud players, defense contractors, automakers, and governments. And yet, it rarely made noise. Jensen Huang, ever the humble showman in a leather jacket, continued to speak at GTC like a professor addressing his students, not a conqueror celebrating his spoils. Nvidia's story wasn't told in tabloids. It was told in developer forums, scientific papers, enterprise roadmaps, and every glowing screen powered by a GPU. What makes Nvidia's takeover especially poetic is that it unfolded in layers, so subtly that by the time the world noticed, it was already complete. Nvidia didn't need to become a household name in the same way as Apple or Google. It only needed to be indispensable to the people who mattered: researchers, engineers, developers, architects of the future. It was never about marketing to the masses, it was about embedding itself into the very bloodstream of progress. This wasn't a revolution of slogans, it was a revolution of silicon, CUDA cores, and code. As we entered the mid-2020s, the idea of compute as destiny became clear. Nations began to measure technological sovereignty not in terms of population, oil reserves, or even nuclear arms, but in compute power. The ability to train frontier models, simulate economic outcomes, develop advanced weaponry, or run national-scale surveillance AI systems, all of it came down to who had the best chips. And Nvidia, practically alone, had them. The A100s, then H100s, then whatever came next. They were more than just products. They were national assets. When OpenAI or Google DeepMind announced a new model, headlines quietly included the GPU count, trained on 25,000 Nvidia GPUs, as if invoking a new metric of power. This led to something astonishing: the commodification of Nvidia-powered infrastructure as a competitive advantage in itself. Startups no longer bragged about the size of their engineering teams. They bragged about their access to Nvidia GPUs. Cloud providers scrambled to differentiate themselves not by software features, but by how fast you could spin up a GPU instance. Entire investment decisions, especially in AI and biotech, were evaluated based on whether the startup could secure enough Nvidia hardware to execute their vision. It was like watching oil refineries become the new venture capital. Nvidia's pricing power soared. It wasn't gouging, it was demand. The chips were worth every penny, because without them, nothing cutting edge could run. Legacy players simply couldn't keep up. Intel, once the invincible giant, was now seen as sluggish and late to the AI party. AMD was valiant, innovative, even aggressive, but lacked Nvidia's software stack and ecosystem flywheel. Google tried to counter with TPUs. Amazon had its Trainium and Inferentia, but all of them still quietly bought Nvidia chips. Why? Because the alternative might be good, but Nvidia was the standard. And in AI, standards move the world. Even Nvidia's brand began to mutate. It wasn't just a tech company anymore, it was a symbol. The black and green logo came to represent a kind of elite tier of computation. If your startup had Nvidia's support, you weren't just validated, you were crowned. Enterprise decision-makers looked for that Nvidia certification like a badge of honor. And Nvidia leaned into that role with quiet but calculated confidence. No chest-thumping, no dystopian PR, just pure, relentless execution. Meanwhile, as the public narrative continued focusing on AI safety, LLM hallucinations, and ethical debates, Nvidia remained behind the curtain. It didn't participate in the arms race of AI media spin. It didn't host AI conferences where philosophy and policy collided. It focused on making the best tools, the fastest chips, the smartest compilers. In doing so, it became both invisible and omnipresent, a paradox that few companies have ever mastered. It was the cathedral and the scaffolding, the sword and the forge. Let's talk economics. By 2025, Nvidia's revenue from data centers alone eclipsed many tech companies' entire business. The GPU wasn't just a component, it was a new form of capital. Hedge funds ran AI models on Nvidia infrastructure. Pharmaceutical companies simulated protein interactions. Logistics firms optimized real-time supply chains. Space agencies trained autonomous craft. Every time a dollar was made through compute-intensive innovation, Nvidia took a tax, quietly, like a sovereign mint. Then came defense. Governments began to realize that traditional military superiority, jets, tanks, bombs, was being outpaced by algorithmic warfare. The real battlefield was cyberspace, drone coordination, autonomous threat detection, satellite image analysis, electronic warfare, all powered by AI. And what did you need to train those models? What did you need to simulate those conflicts, manage that surveillance, decode that signal? Nvidia hardware. You could have the best cyber team in the world, but if you didn't have the GPU muscle to back it, you were bringing a knife to a digital gunfight. Naturally, this raised alarms. Nvidia found itself at the center of a geopolitical tug-of-war. The US government began leaning on it more heavily, while simultaneously restricting its most advanced chips from reaching adversaries. The company became a kind of semi-sovereign actor, a corporate nation with the power to shape the fate of AI across borders. And still, Nvidia maintained its serene exterior. No politics, just specs. But the most terrifying and awe-inspiring truth of all is this. Nvidia didn't set out to conquer the world. It simply pursued excellence, obsessively, methodically, almost spiritually. While other companies chased headlines, Nvidia chased performance. While Silicon Valley inflated with bloat and corporate theater, Nvidia ran lean, with engineers at the helm. Jensen Huang didn't present like a tech mogul. He presented like a monk of silicon. Focused, articulate, hungry. He often talked about how AI was the single most powerful force of our lifetime. And he was right. But what he rarely needed to say was this. Nvidia wasn't just participating in that force, it was shaping it. Every architectural choice, every software update, every partner integration, it all quietly steered the direction of innovation. And it did so without ever needing to own the final product. That's the genius. Nvidia doesn't compete with ChatGPT, it makes ChatGPT possible. It doesn't run Tesla, it fuels its autonomy. It doesn't build robot arms, but its chips give them sight. Now consider where this is all going. Nvidia's roadmap hints at chips that blur the lines between CPU, GPU, and AI accelerator entirely. Unified memory models, energy-efficient edge inference, real-time simulations of Earth-scale systems, You don't build that unless you're thinking centuries ahead. While the rest of the world debates quarterly earnings and startup valuations, Nvidia appears to be planning for something much larger, perhaps even post-human computation. AGI, simulated civilizations, quantum-accelerated science. Whatever the frontier is, Nvidia seems to already be standing there, sketching out the schematics. And that's the punchline. By the time the world realized it was running on Nvidia, it was already too late to unplug. The stack is too integrated. The software is too familiar. The hardware is too good. The alternatives are too far behind. Governments may try to regulate it, competitors may try to out-innovate it, critics may try to downplay it, but the game is already won, quietly, elegantly, completely. This isn't just a business case study, it's a philosophical one. Nvidia's rise challenges our assumptions about power. You don't always need to be loud to dominate. You don't need to be viral to be vital. You don't need to be everywhere in the media to be everywhere in reality. Sometimes, all you need to do is build the most important tools for the smartest people in the room, and then let history do the rest. By the mid-2020s, there was a phrase that circulated quietly among AI engineers, tech strategists, and forward-looking investors. The world runs on Nvidia. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was a recognition of something deeper. This wasn't just a chip company. It was a substrate for the future. So here we are, living in a world where Nvidia doesn't just power progress, it predicts it. Where every breakthrough in AI, every leap in autonomous systems, every new simulation of the physical world is quietly humming along on a chip that traces back to a company most people still only associate with better graphics. But here's what should keep you up at night. What happens when Nvidia doesn't just supply the tools, but decides to start building with them? What happens when the quiet architect decides to step onto the stage and say, "We're not just enabling the future, we are the future"? Because think about it. What do you really know about what Nvidia's working on in its deepest labs? What lies beyond Hopper, Grace, and the bleeding edge? What AI models are they training internally that haven't been announced? What military-grade simulations are running on clusters no outsider is allowed to see? What happens when the most powerful compute company on Earth builds something that no one, not OpenAI, not Google, not China, can compete with? Can. And here's the final twist. The thing that should make your stomach drop and your eyebrows rise. Nvidia doesn't need to conquer the world. It just needs to turn it on. And when that switch flips, when the next generation of AI wakes up, when the next simulation becomes indistinguishable from reality, when the digital and physical finally fuse, you'll be running on Nvidia. You just won't know it yet. Stay tuned.